Even though all four Gospels include the baptism of Jesus in their telling, they don't all quite see it the same way. Matthew and Luke together, for instance, speak of the skies opening as if some puff of air gently blows a door open and pushes soft clouds aside. The Spirit comes cooing and fluttering over the surface of the water. Mark, on the other hand, imagines something stronger and wilder, more akin to the power of a Chinook wind than a summer breeze. It's not an insignificant detail. The verb Mark uses to describe what happens when God enters the baptism scene is schizomai, a Greek word which means tearing or ripping. When God enters the story of Jesus' baptism, the skies are torn apart. The heavens are ripped open. It's reminiscent of the cry of the prophet Isaiah, who amplifies the anguish of the people of Israel, defeated in war and carried off into exile, when he pleads with God, "Oh, that you would tear open the heavens and come down." The author of Mark's gospel might say that the baptism of Jesus is God's answer to that pleading, that prayer. Or as biblical scholar Brian Blount puts it, schizomai is tiger talk. The God we meet in Mark's story is wild and untamed. God breaks in the way a tiger in a zoo would if he could crash open his cage as you complacently walk by. So imagine the scene now. Jesus at his baptism, splashing as he comes up out of the Jordan River, clouds tearing, heavens ripping, divine voice booming, Spirit descending, dove dive bombing. Schizomai. It's as if something that had been safely locked away, something seldom seen, breaks its way through and crashes through the ceiling and changes the very architecture of the universe. In the ancient Hebrew imagination, God lived up there in the sky, far away beyond the blue. We get a glimpse of that understanding at the very beginning of the Bible in the creation story in Genesis, where the heavens and the earth are separated. The heavens up there above the dome, the earth down here below. God in God's home there, human beings and nature here, God's realm, God's hope, God's home, holiness, separate, orderly, apart. There was so much distance between heaven and earth, between human and divine, that our spiritual ancestors went so far as to believe that no one could look upon the face of God and live. God was simply too holy, too powerful, too bright. So when the temple in Jerusalem was built, an inner sanctuary was created, a place called the Holy of Holies. It was a curtain section that was thought to contain the very presence of God. No one was permitted past the curtain except the high priest, and even then, only once a year, on the Day of Atonement, when he went in with fear and trembling to ask forgiveness for the sins of the people. God was understood as separate, distant, dangerous, a caged tiger. But then there was Jesus. From the very beginning of his gospel, Mark makes it clear that when the heavens are ripped apart, they will never again close as neatly as before. Because when the Spirit descended, it didn't just land on Jesus. No, Mark says the Spirit rushed into Jesus, birthing him, possessing him, driving him into his ministry. When the heavens are torn apart, God rushes through that opening. God takes full hold of Jesus, and through him, God starts running loose out in the world, daring all of us to keep up with God's action. According to the eyes and ears of Mark, this tearing of the heavenly veil is the central calling and theme of Jesus' entire ministry. From the day he saw the heavens torn apart, Jesus begins tearing things too, breaking down the boundary between heavenly wholeness and human brokenness, tearing apart any social fabric that separates people, smashing the chains that bind and restrict some, taking down the walls that separate the rich and the poor, the clean and the unclean, breaking down every barrier that defines some as insiders and others as outsiders, crossing borders between men and women, Jews and Gentiles, breaking through hardness of heart to bring forth compassion, and entering into the torn and tender places of people's lives, so that we will know we are God's beloved children too. The tearing of the heavens enacts the promise that nothing will ever be the same, because when it happened, it was God who did the tearing. The boundaries between heaven and earth, between human and divine, between God and us, would never again close so tightly. At the end of his life, Jesus hung on a cross, and when he breathed his last, the curtain in the temple, you may remember, was torn in two, from top to bottom, schismai again, torn apart as the heavens had been torn apart at Jesus' baptism. The Holy of Holies no longer separated the sanctuary from the people. The curtain could not be repaired. On that day, there was no voice from the sky, not even a whisper. But there was a voice, not far off, but close by, not up, but down. A Roman centurion soldier stood at the foot of the cross, keeping order, waiting to pronounce death. And when he saw that Jesus had breathed his last, he said this instead: "Truly, this man was the Son of God." The soldier repeated the words God said at the river Jordan, the word that came through the torn place in the sky, through the torn curtain in the temple. "This is my son, my child, the beloved." As we move through the Gospel of Mark over the next several weeks, schismai will surely be our guiding word as we wonder what it means to follow the one who is God on the loose, the one who breaks boundaries and crosses borders, the one who calls us to do the same because we have joined our lives to his in baptism, the one who can be found breaking into our lives, entering even those places where we are torn, especially in those places where we've been broken open. And so today, I ask, where are the torn places in your life? We all have them. The places where it felt like a tiger was let loose, or something possessed you, or drove you, or something broke you open in ways that can never be closed again. As I thought about this question in relation to my own life, one experience in particular came immediately to mind, and I offer it as an invitation to you to reflect on your own life and the ways God enters it. For me, it was the death of twins Phil and I were expecting, children who died before they were born, before Sam and Nikki came into our lives. The experience taught me as a young adult that try as I might, there are things in life that I cannot plan or control, things that I can't be in charge of, but can only surrender to. It was a hard lesson for me. It was also the first great loss in my life, and it was terrible. But what lingers for me most is the surprise I felt at how every single, simple, ordinary, tender gesture of kindness and care held me and healed me. Every one of them felt like God to me. I remember, too, that as I shared the sad news with my congregation, women in their 70s and 80s wept openly and fell into Phil's and my arms as they told us of the babies in their own lives who were stillborn or miscarried, children whom they had never before felt the permission to grieve. I remember how grateful Phil and I felt to know that we were not alone, that others understood us so fully, and that somehow our experience created a safe and open space for others to step into and to share their grief. In the midst of the brokenness and confusion and sorrow, I also had the sense that this experience was remaking me. I learned that a broken heart can make you more fearful and anxious and less trusting. Or it can break you open in a way that softens you, makes you more compassionate, and helps you to see life for the remarkable gift that it is. It can also do those things alternately, sometimes even on the same day, so be careful. But in the end, it's the torn place that may be the very place where God will enter and remind you in a way that you won't forget that you are God's own, God's very own beloved child. That's part of my story. What is yours? A season of reflecting is before us, and I invite you to begin by remembering, by opening yourself to the time of tearing, of openness, of transformation. Amen.